I just wanted to remind you guys that I am starting to launch the speaking practice. Behind the scenes, I'm getting some things put together so I can start reaching out to organizations to talk about leadership from a grandfather's perspective. Now, if you think this might be a topic that your organization would enjoy hearing, please reach out to me. Ask me some questions. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do you also find it difficult to build up a meaningful relationship with your grandchildren at a distance? As a long-distance aunt to a 2-year-old in Australia, I wanted to create solutions for the millions of family members who cannot be physically together all the time. This is why I created Peekabond, an app that helps you to connect with young children at a distance. The app works with the following 3 steps. First, we give playful activities suggestions that are based on your child's development stage. These suggestions are science-based and gamified. Secondly, you can create a private family circle. And finally, we'll let you send videos back and forth so you don't have to be live at the same time, and save them in one spot for your grandchild to watch. We've got over 120 content suggestions. You can build a love bank for your grandchildren. And if you go to the Cool Grandpa website and look for the affiliate links, sign up for a newsletter with a lot of inspiring content, or you can try the app for free.
Welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited for you to join us today because this is going to be a great conversation. We are going to be focused on volunteering and mentoring and how grandpas and grandparents in general can get involved and support multi-generational activities. Ben Manny is a long-distance grandpa. He is somebody that, as we start our conversation, is going to talk to us about how he's staying engaged with his grandsons, both by being on site for about a half a year, as well as being remote for about a half a year. We're going to hear some great stories about him using technology to stay connected with his grandsons. Ben is also going to be sharing with us how he started to become involved in multi-generational volunteer efforts a couple of years before he retired from Intel, and then after retiring from Intel, about how he found some different groups and became a mentor and a coach within several of those organizations. You guys are sure going to be inspired and hopefully motivated to find an organization that you want to spend time with, that you can help develop the next generation of young leaders. Without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down and talk with us about mentoring and volunteering, as well as your experience with being a grandfather.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. This is actually my first podcast, so I feel honored and special to be asked to participate in a podcast.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were introduced by Carrie from the Long Distance Grandparent Society. And so this has been a great interaction for us to try to get together to know each other a little bit more as members of Carrie's group. So this is going to be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Carrie's group is interesting. I was actually the first member to join Carrie's group. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, she had mentioned you're member number 1.
Right. Yeah, I got acquainted through another mutual, not really friend, but another person that I got hooked up with who does seminars for aging parents, basically, and really good health tips. And Carrie's kind of modeled her organization after her. And I've always been interested in communicating better with grandkids, since mine are long distance. Well, they're about a 12-hour drive away, so you just don't do that every day.
Right. No, same here. Mine are about 10 hours away, 11 or 12, depending on the pit stops. But
Right.
This is great. Now, one of the questions that I ask grandfathers when I have them on is if you could take us back a little bit and recall your reaction to hearing the news that you were going to become a grandfather for the first time.
Well, I have really thought hard trying to remember. It was a while back. I'd been retired for about two years. My youngest daughter actually had our first grandson. She was in her early 30s at the time. She'd been married about 4 or 5 years. And I just don't actually remember where I was or what my reaction was. I guess I wasn't real surprised. I did notice my wife got more excited than me because I guess she knew more about what that meant. And I just, my daughter had been away from our house. She went off to college, and that was over 10 years ago. And she was the youngest. Then we were empty nesters. So it was just, okay. I've been working with youth at the time, and this is, just another grandkid coming along. One of the things I realized, I don't know, maybe after 2 or 3 times of seeing that the grandson, that this is a pretty big deal. and what I do remember was when our first daughter was born, I think the next weekend, my mother-in-law came to visit us. She was so thrilled, and I never understood that. I was just, well, it's a kid, it's a baby.
Right.
But it was her first grandchild, so she was just overjoyed, and now I understand why she was so excited. Because it really is a game-changing experience, and I mentioned that to several people. We can talk more about that if you want, but it really does change a lot of things. I guess no matter what stage of life you're in, when you're retired, of course, you have more discretionary time. So you're probably able to change more things than you would if you were still working. But anyway, it's been a wonderful experience having grandkids.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I love to hear everybody's stories because everybody has a unique take on when that experience hits and how it hits. We've got people that I always say, we have folks that are a little bit like me where it feels like, oh, I'm way too young to become a grandfather. What are you doing to me? And then we've got other folks where it's like, I never thought I would become a grandfather. The kids were married and off and gone for so long that I thought we were going to be grandparents to their puppies or something. So it's always great to listen to, everybody's reaction, and to note too that everybody has a different reaction, but then it all comes back to, I think, learning to love and appreciate, our sons and daughters and those grandkids. It all sinks in at different times. And of course, grandmas have different reactions than grandfathers, because I'm a little bit of the same. When I went up and saw my brand new granddaughter, I really enjoyed holding her for a little bit and feeding her a bottle. But after about 5 minutes, I was okay with giving her up. And it was like, okay, I've done this experience. I'm going to pass it on to my wife, who, sat there for a half hour or so with the little baby and all
right.
that.
She probably didn't want to give her up.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. And I think if she could have smuggled the granddaughter into our luggage to come back to Georgia, she would have, if she could have gotten away with it. Now, what are some of the things that you're doing to stay connected to the grandchildren? I know when we talked before that you bought a house close to one of them, but I know too, being part of this long distance grandparent, that there's things that come up and some tips and tricks that you might have come across with how you can stay connected to the grandkids over a distance.
Well, we raised 2 daughters, and unfortunately, it doesn't really matter. We don't have any granddaughters. we have 3 grandsons, and actually that works out well because I always kind of wanted a son. Now I have like 3 grandsons, so it kind of fills in some experiences that I didn't have as a father of a son. but it really varies, and I can think it varies too with age. Our oldest grandson is just about to become 14, so he's already a teenager. His voice has just changed. I think he's going to catch up with me in height this year. He's already caught up to my wife. Our youngest grandson actually turns 9 on Friday of this week. So, and he was actually the son of our oldest granddaughter, our oldest daughter. I thought she would probably be the first parent of a grandchild, because she married into her husband's the youngest of 4 kids, so it was a pretty big family, and he loves kids. He's coached grade school, and he's always around kids, and he's really playful guy. So I thought sure that they would probably have the first grandchild, but and their income was a little bit more stable situation. My other daughter, who's only about 2 years younger, she ended up becoming an occupational therapist, and she married a husband that was still in school. He was training to be a cardiologist, and that's a long study. But they had gotten to a point where I guess they felt comfortable enough to go ahead and start their family. And I think they had an easier time than our older daughter. Her older daughter was almost 40 when they finally had our youngest grandson. So to stay connected, it varies somewhat. With our youngest grandson, we do a weekly Zoom call every Sunday afternoon, late in the afternoon. And the reason why that's working out really well, we didn't immediately do that, but we've been doing this. Part of that was Carrie's influence, but I found out that it's a really convenient time for my daughter, who is trying to catch up on housework, trying to get dinner ready. And so she can let us entertain Chance, is his name, for that period of time. It works out really well. And we will have an hour. I think the longest time we had was like 2-hour Zoom call with Chance. And we do all kinds of different things. He's very comfortable with Zoom. He's in 3rd grade now, but all of 2nd grade, he had to do it from home on Zoom. So he's become very comfortable with it. And that's just how we stay connected. We do different things. Sometimes we'll do a craft together. Sometimes we'll play some games. There's some pretty good websites where you can do interactive games. He loves jokes, and sometimes we'll trade jokes. We'll say some riddles, and he'll say some riddles. And we just end up doing all kinds of things with him on these Zoom calls. The other two, which is where we have our second home, because we're down there, we have really a different kind of relationship. We probably spend about, before COVID, about 100 days a year roughly down there. So about less than a third of our time down there. And that gives us a chance to participate more in their activities. They're both very active. One of them plays tennis, so we take them to tennis practice. The other is into martial arts, and he does, I think all of them. He does taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, and judo. And so he stays real busy with that. And we also help him with schoolwork and so on. So it's a little different relationship. Well, we don't Zoom call with them as often, but we do exchange text. They both have their own cell phones now, so we text back and forth, and we stay connected that way.
And it's interesting too that you've been able to make sure that you're using technology in what the grandkids are comfortable with and what they're using to be staying connected, and not just a phone conversation. I know when I was growing up, it was a phone call or it was a letter, and now everybody's got all these different apps. Everybody's got all this different technology. Do you find that that's made a big difference with, keeping the conversation and keeping the relationships ongoing, is making sure that you're using whatever technology the kids are comfortable with and what they're using?
I think the kids are more comfortable with technology than I am, even though that's my background. They grew up with it, and it's hard to really put yourself in their shoes. It's always been there for them, and so it's a natural part of their daily life. And it's I grew up in the 50s, and I guess the big innovation there were these tape recorders. My dad actually bought one, and he would communicate with his mother, my grandmother, with these little tapes. He'd record a tape, and sometimes he'd record an event like a birthday or a Christmas morning, and he'd send her these magnetic tapes. I wish I had them now, but he was kind of using technology at that time that was advanced for that time to try to stay in touch with his mother. She didn't have a tape recorder, so we don't have any of her recordings. But no, I think it really does help. It's kind of a double-edged sword with these kids, though, because they can get so engaged with their screens, especially if they have their own device, that they will sometimes want to do that as opposed to interfacing with you. I know in some of the earlier sessions that we have with the youngest grandson, he's a big Minecraft player. And so he would want to spend time showing us him playing Minecraft. And he can do that on Zoom. He just shares the screen and plays Minecraft. And it was good for him because he enjoyed showing off. It was boring to me a little bit, but it still was a way to connect with him. So I don't think it's that bad. Some of these games probably are worse, but Minecraft is a very interesting game, a very creative kind of game. I'm not a gamer, although when I was a parent with our two daughters, we had a PC, and I would play these games like King's Quest, which was kind of an adventure game where you'd search for things. So I can understand how these kids would really get hooked on that. And the vendors have gotten pretty good about targeting those games to do that, which I have some second thoughts about. But an interesting sidelight on that is that the other two grandsons, they were really into Fortnite and these other games. And I can't quite get the straight story here, but they just went cold turkey. They started realizing that those games were just making them agitated and anxious, and they just quit playing them. Now, they'll watch YouTube and these other things, but they're not really serious gamers anymore, which I think is great as a grandparent. But I wish I could know what they did so that I could share that with other grandparents who have kids that are going through that stage right now.
Right. It may have just been something that they've realized along with their parents about, that endless cycle, and it's part of the game, right? It's the next level and get to the next thing. And there's always a next thing, where I think a lot of the games that we played, I'm thinking back to the board games or even the early computer games, there was always kind of an end to the quest. Or, at Monopoly, you either got sick and tired of playing for hours on end and everybody gave up, or you collected all the properties, or whatever that was.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. I completely agree with you there. And I think the other thing that plays into that is that your goal is a little different. You keep wanting to acquire more. You're not doing it just for relaxation and fun and playing with other people. It's a whole different kind of setting than these other games that you were talking about.
Right. Now, I do want to pivot a little bit to where we had talked about previously is the volunteering and the mentoring that you're doing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you've gotten into this role, because I feel like whether you're a grandfather or just an older man, that there's many opportunities to jump in and become that mentor, use your experience to help other people out. And maybe it's just younger adults, or maybe it is children. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about how did you become and start getting into the volunteering and mentoring efforts that you're involved in?
Yeah, that started maybe 2 or 3 years before I retired. I realized I worked for Intel for almost 30 years, and it's a very demanding job working in technology like that. And I wanted to be sure that when I did retire, that I would feel I was still having a fulfilling life. And I started working for a good friend of mine who was in charge of the industrial relations department for the uh, Oregon University system. So the 5 or 6 major schools. And so they would have these different programs that they would monitor. They would get money from the university programs. Their goal was to train and feed those schools with engineers. And so these programs were designed to have this. You talk about development workforce. They were kind of developing a future student population, and so I got involved with some of that, and I found it pretty rewarding. Again, I was working with other adults to review these RFPs, and then when we granted a particular project, we would hold quarterly meetings with that organization and kind of track what they were doing. So that's how I kind of got started. And then when I finished, one of the people that I'd met through that experience was a high school teacher who was mentoring these students. They were MIT Lemelson Invent Team students. They would do a project and then they'd go to MIT and show it off. And they got significant funding from the Lemelson Foundation, which is headquartered here in Portland. Lemelson was a very prolific inventor. He had a couple hundred patents and did really well that way. So that was his way of kind of giving back. I never did meet him, but his wife was still alive when I started working with this program. And so that introduced me to high school students and working with them. I actually do have a teaching certificate for high school physics and math that I never did use. I was in Texas when I got that and just had gotten married and just couldn't afford I would get more as a graduate research assistant than a teacher. And so even though I kind of liked teaching, I think it's kind of in my family line. My dad wasn't a professor, but his dad was, and all of his brothers were. So I don't know if that's anything you inherit or not. But anyway, I had that interest in teaching youth. And this, when I retired, I started doing more and more of that. I got involved also when I decided to retire. Instead of focusing on a particular problem, I wanted to focus on developing problem solvers. And in my experience, engineers and technicians are trained to be problem solvers. And so I kind of focused on volunteer activities that would inspire these younger students to become involved in engineering and technology. And the best program that I found for that is a program called FIRST. FIRST is a program that Dean Kamen started. Dean is the one who invented the Segway. And he started it 30 years ago. And he's got these different divisions, if you will. And the one that I enjoyed most was this first Lego League division. It involved building robots, programming them, and having them compete for points. They wouldn't fight each other. They had a set of missions they needed to do, and depending upon what missions you did and how many you could do in a 2.5 minutes, you would get different scores. They also had a research project that was associated with the theme for that year. And then they also judged how the robot was designed. And I think one of the more interesting characteristics they judged was something called core values. They had teamwork and other attributes of a team that they actually judged. You would have to go in and show the team interacted. So I got involved with that as a judge for a number of years. And then about 5 years ago, I was asked to coach a team. And so that's how I got connected to the neighborhood kids here. That's a whole nother chapter, but it took it up a whole notch. I'd never coached a team like that. These teams range in size from like 3 to 10 students, and they start at the 4th grade and go up through 9th grade. So when I started doing that coaching, the kids were all within walking distance of our house, and the parents were about the same age as my kids. So it was kind of like I was like a grandfather to a lot of them. And in fact, just this past weekend, one of the families that I had coached, both of their parents are still alive. So they had two sets of grandparents, and I had met them before, but I was introduced as kind of their third set of grandparents, my wife and I.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's a really good feeling to have these kids in the neighborhood when you don't have your own grandkids here that you can have that kind of relationship with.
Absolutely. One of the things that I wanted to also get your input on, or your thoughts, the difference between mentoring and grandparenting, because there's a lot of similarities between the two in that I think as grandfathers, we are kind of a mentor, wise old man kind of thing with the grandkids, right?
Right.
I kind of kick against that, but I'm okay with it. I'm getting used to it, but wanted to get your take on some of the differences between mentoring and grandparenting, because some of them are very obvious, I think, and then some of them are very subtle as far as those differences.
Yeah, I think the obvious one is to kind of compare that to teachers and parents. Teachers are like mentors, and of course, parents are like grandparents in terms of how they interface with the child that's growing up. Usually, when you mentor, there is some choice in your part as a mentor and their part as a mentee as to whether that relationship is going to happen or not. You don't have that situation as a grandparent. You're kind of, for better or for worse, that's the way it is. And so that's one difference. But I think probably the biggest difference that I have noted is a time frame. When you're mentoring these kids, the ages that I do, they're going through all these changes, and usually you're focused on a specific skill that you want to transfer to them. It could be some academic skill. There are some other programs that focus more on life skills, and I'm involved in a program called PC Pals. It's a program that Intel sponsors where they basically adopt a classroom, and these are mostly middle schoolers, and it's a pen pal program that's based on sending email. And so you get introduced to these students at the beginning of the semester, and due to safety reasons, you have to terminate any email after the year. It's just they're just worried about both the mentor and the mentee's safety. And there they usually will ask you questions, and you can ask them questions. Yesterday, I got an email from my PC pal. He says, "What's your favorite memory?" And so you get these different questions, and actually it's interesting because you can gives you something to think about, and they're trying to kind of figure out who you are, and you're trying to figure out who they are. So you have these different kinds of mentoring relationships. But with the grandparent, it's an evolving relationship. I think initially it's important to just be like a source of fun and play with your grandkids. Don't worry about teaching them anything. Just have fun with them. And I think that what that does is it establishes a tie where they there's a connection there that they can build on. And as they get older, you can start to introduce some other values that you might have and tell them stories. They love stories about how you grew up and how things were different, So it evolves as they get older. Your relationship does change, but of course, if you're lucky enough to have them physically close to you, then that enables a lot more things to be done. But then at the same time, they start taking you for granted. When COVID hit 2 years ago, we actually were at our second home in Stockton. And normally we spend 3 weeks down there. We spent 3 months down there because we weren't allowed to come back to Oregon, basically. And so this is right at the beginning. So no one really knew what was going on. So it gave us a chance to to be with them. And it was really a perfect time because they couldn't go to school. So they had online learning. So, but then even after all those changes, after 6, 7 weeks, it became, you're no longer special guest. If you're a long distance grandparent, you come in and everything stops while you're there. You're the focus of their life. And that doesn't happen, I think, if you live in the same city. So it does, I think, even take effort if they are with you to keep that relationship special.
No, I agree. And that's one of the interesting points, too, that I talk to grandfathers about when they happen to live in the same town or city or street, neighborhood, whatnot, because it's figuring out how do you differentiate special grandpa time versus, okay, this is just, another adult that's I see every single day, whether grandparents are babysitting or taking care of children for a while. It's always that challenge of figuring out how do you balance out special time versus that, hey, we're sitting down and helping out with schoolwork and this is what we do every day when you come over to the house.
Right. I think if I was faced with that situation, what I would try doing it would be to arrange a special trip, go out of the state, go out of the country, even, especially on their age group and what their interests are. But just, I'm fortunate that I'm still married. I've been married over 50 years. So we would take I haven't done this yet, but the kids are just getting old enough. They just got back from Philadelphia. They had spring break last week, and they spent some time with some friends they had there. And he's starting to get into history and so on. So they're at the age now, and also the parents are probably willing to let us have them. And when they're younger like that, the parents are super protective. I don't think we can do that yet with our 9-year-old. But the other two that are brothers, the 14 and 11-year-old, we could probably take on a trip someplace. And I think that would give you special time. I think scouting is another good way to do that. If you're involved with scouting, you can go camping with them. Or I think you need to look for those times when you take them out of the routine, and then it becomes more of a special time.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I like the idea of being able to help out with the scouts. I don't know necessarily if as a grandfather I want to be the scoutmaster, but certainly, if the opportunity arises, being an assistant scoutmaster or, and helping out and volunteering that way.
Yeah, and that also gets you contact with the other youth there. And I think that's really healthy to have that. It gives them another adult that they can associate with. And I think that's so important as kids grow up, is to have other adults that they feel comfortable with and they can talk to and have good conversations with.
Sure. One of the things that you had mentioned was talking about, I think, setting up these activities with your wife, the grandma. How do you differentiate, or how does the relationship work between grandparenting with your spouse and then the volunteering? How much inclusion between the two tends to go on?
There are a few things that my wife and I do together with our church, but the other volunteer activity that I am involved with are things that she's not interested in. And she does things that I'm not as interested in. So it varies depending upon what the activity is, how that works out. One of the other things that I'm involved with in terms of youth is this organization called SAGE, Senior Advocates for Generational Equity. This organization is just about 10 years old, and its goal, its mission is to inspire elders to give back to youth so they can have so they can thrive. It's based upon a Greek proverb. I think it goes something like a society grows great when its elders plant trees they know they will never sit in. So it's kind of passing the baton, if you will, and doing what you can to give back, and usually skipping a generation to ensure that happens. That's so important to have that kind of connection. And our country, especially in the last century, became pretty age segregated. And I think they're realizing now that that's not a good thing. These retirement communities like Sun City, while they might be lots of fun, they're missing that element of the energy and the connection you have with youth. And they're starting to realize that it's much better if you can kind of design these situations where there's those interactions.
Oh, I think that's great having that come back. And I do think too that some of that was just typical post World War II Levittown subdivisions, nuclear family kind of activity where it was mom, dad, was it 3 kids and a dog, or two, two and a half kids and a dog, something like that. And we lost the multi-generational connections. And some of this has been natural. I mean, we were talking, I had grown up and was born in Portland, Oregon, and my father had moved to Louisville and then Northern Virginia, and the family remained in Oregon. And so, we're a highly mobile society, but we've got the technology, and then there's these groups too to expose children to older adults for some of their mentorship and some of the other interactions that they get, whether it's the Lego robotics or just church groups or crafting or the volunteer groups within the community.
Right.
What would you say is a good way for somebody that has been, like you were talking about, we're heads down, focused on work. We've helped out here and there with the kids as they've been growing up, whether it was Scouts or Little League or whatnot, but we haven't been real involved. And now, men of our age are starting to look around, whether it's towards retirement or after retirement. How would you suggest somebody find organizations or activities that they would like to engage in or volunteer with?
I think you work your network. Start with people that you know that are involved with that activity, and go out from there. There's also lots of websites that advertise volunteer opportunities. And there's projects where you do beach cleanup or things like that. So you can start to get involved with that. Some organizations, Intel started this program called Encore Fellowships, where if you are about to retire, you can sign up for this program. It's sponsored by Encore.org, Mark Friedman's organization, where the company will pay a nonprofit money, which they in turn give you as a stipend. So you commit to volunteer. It's not really volunteering because you get a stipend, 1,000 hours of service with this nonprofit. And in return, they get the use of your service basically for free because they don't have to pay anything, and you get a pretty nice stipend for that. And what that does is it allows someone who's really not used to a nonprofit environment a chance to experience that. It's quite different than a for-profit company. So I think those are great programs that they have, and some of these experiences can be done. I mean, the nonprofits will just often decide to pay the stipend themselves because of the trained labor that they get when they do that. So you can check out things like these Encore Fellowship programs that help you do this off ramp from your work experience to your retirement experience. And then, of course, there's other organizations. You mentioned churches, Scouts. Those things always are looking for volunteers. So you can start there. Teachers also need a lot of help, especially in things that are dealing with out of school time activity. One of the things I was looking forward to was actually helping with the instructions during school, but that is so regimented these days that it's hard for you to contribute that way. But these schools have after-school programs like that program I mentioned, the Lemelson Invent Team, and then these Lego robotics programs. Quite often schools will have these programs, and they usually run out of the school time. And there it's more open, and you can contribute in those respects.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you. And I'll be sure to put links to Encore and some of these other activities and organizations that we've talked about into the show notes so people can find them if they want to. In your opinion, do you think that grandfathers should stick with volunteering within, I guess, their background, whether it's professional or their hobbies, or do you think there's some value in whether it's your network or somebody that goes, hey, I need some help over here, but you don't necessarily know anything about that, meaning like if you grew up playing baseball and you've never played soccer in your life, but then somebody says, hey, we need some help with a soccer coach or something, do you think there's some value in jumping in to some of these areas, or do you think it's a little bit of a frustration that might lead to some negative outcomes?
Well, I think you need to be clear as to what your role, what the expectation is for you in that position. I mean, are you there to teach them how to, kick the soccer ball, and you've never done it before? That just won't work. But if you're there to help organize a team and get the kids to work together and just kind of back up the coach, and you can often learn yourself. I mean, if you haven't ever kicked the soccer ball and the coach is there, you can watch what he does, and then you can maybe go off and help some kid who's having a little bit of trouble. So you can treat that as a learning experience for yourself. In my mind, what's important is that the chemistry feels good. If it feels like the right thing to do, do it. And I wouldn't. Of course, you don't want to, stretch yourself to where it'll be either something you do something that's hurts you because you're physically not what you were before, or if it makes you feel uncomfortable. Kids, they know what sincerity is, and you can't fake things with them. So you can just say, well, I've never cooked. You teach me. And sometimes that works too, because the kids learn a lot. Everyone learns a lot by teaching. And so if you've never kicked the soccer ball, you can have the kid teach you how to do that. And then they can maybe give you tips, and they can kind of see what you're doing wrong. And I think that works okay too.
I like the idea of bringing, let's say, your skill set to something that's new, because oftentimes we don't necessarily think that we can contribute to something that's outside of our normal domain knowledge base. But it turns out we actually have these hidden talents. And to your point, maybe they need some organization, and they need a hand with rounding up the kids and, keep them focused, and that could be transitioned over to some of your academic clubs or some of your other engineering type activities. Is that, maybe you're not the knowledge on how to do the robots, but you're there and can help motivate the kids and help organize and take some of those activities off of the leader of the group, let's say.
Right. And you also have a different view, I guess the popular word these days is lens. You look at things differently than anyone else. And if you're not, sometimes you can be too close to a problem to really realize that there's some other ways to do these things. And even though you might not have any expertise in that field, you might have experienced something that would help in that situation.
No, that's great advice. Now, as we're starting to wrap up this conversation a little bit, what advice would you have for new grandfathers that don't necessarily live close to their grandchildren about building those connections? We talked a little bit about some of the things that you've done at the first part of the conversation, but is there anything that pops to mind that you would offer words of wisdom or advice for grandfathers?
Yeah, I think what's really fundamental is that you have a very good relationship with your son or daughter-in-law or son-in-law that are the parents of the grandchild. They are kind of the gatekeepers, and it's real important to have a clear understanding and a very good relationship with them. Otherwise, it just becomes such a struggle, I think, to go much beyond that. The other thing that I would recommend too is that these kids grow up so fast, these grandkids, and it's important from the very beginning, from when you can hold them, to nurture them and have that kind of nurturing relationship that just will continue through their lives. Of course, it'll change in what form that nurturing takes, but I think you have a lot to give to them, and they have a lot to give to you. It keeps you feeling younger again. It helps you feel fulfilled. We're not going to be around here forever, and this is, I think, the way people can kind of pass on and feel better about, when the time comes and they have to really pass on, that they've already had a chance to enrich somebody's life. And of course, the grandkids are probably the first, and then your kids, and then anyone else that you can maybe have an opportunity to help influence. I think those are the things that are so key.
Are there?
One other thing I wanted to mention. You were talking about long distance, and I forgot to mention that part. I think what's important in that case is to get into a routine, to have a scheduled time where you're going to be interacting with them. They look forward to it. You look forward to it. You can prepare for that time and make the most of that time. And as people live by schedules these days, and that also helps with the relationship with their parents, if you can fit into their schedule, and not fight that. I think that's really another important aspect of a long distance grandparent.
That's great advice. And one last thing I want to just ask you about is, was there anything about volunteering or being a mentor that you would like to cover that maybe I haven't asked you about?
I got to give that some thought. We covered lots of ground. We haven't talked a lot about how it helps you. I think you get a lot out of that. It's not just passing on. I've always liked to learn new things, and it's interesting to me. For example, if a youth is reading a book, for me to read that book, and to see if I can have a good conversation with them about that book, because you'll be interested to see how they view these characters, and then you can explain how you view those characters. And also, the kids have lots of new stuff. I mean, I've learned some interesting things from my grandsons. One of the things they got into was throwing playing cards that they would stick in a piece of styrofoam. and he picked up the Rubik's Cube, and he can solve a Rubik's Cube in 15 seconds. So I think, and it's just interesting to watch these kids develop and to try to do what they're doing. To me, that's just rewarding. You get to learn new skills, and so you get a lot of benefit out of it as well.
That's a great point in that, it keeps us fresh. It keeps us on our toes, and definitely keeps us, learning what's going on in the world. Well, Ben, I want to wrap this up and just say thank you so much for being on the podcast and taking time out of your day to talk to us about your experience with being a grandfather and with your experience with, being a volunteer and a mentor in all these different organizations you belong to.
Well, thanks for asking good questions. Hopefully this will be helpful to some of your audience.
Oh, it will for sure. Thanks. This was a fun conversation with Ben. I really enjoyed learning how he's had to shift gears a little bit from having daughters as he was a parent to now having grandsons. Not all of us do that, but occasionally there's some of us that either had all sons like myself and now have some granddaughters, or those of us that had all daughters and now have a bunch of grandsons. So it's always great to get that perspective. One thing that was a big takeaway for me was just how it was so easy to find some organizations to get involved with that allow you to take what you've learned either through your career or formal training or just life skills in general and be able to reach out and support the younger generation. And of course, this could be through scouts or sports or even robotics clubs like Ben was describing. So I encourage you guys to find organizations that could use your help, that you would enjoy volunteering and giving your time and expertise to. and I'm sure your life is going to be the richer for it. So, hey, until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.